Good afternoon and good morning to those in other parts of the world, and good evening to those in the East Coast. Welcome. I'm Janice Kaminer-Resnick, and I'm happy to welcome you on behalf of the members of our leadership team, which includes former Congressman Mel Levine, former Los Angeles County Supervisor Zev Yaroslavsky, and myself. Welcome back, and many thanks to tonight's guests in the middle of what they're going through right now. We really appreciate the time that Paul Maslin and Celinda Lake are giving to our audience, two of the country's most respected and busiest political researchers, analysts, and pollsters. If you watched CNN yesterday morning, you saw Celinda Lake on CNN's Inside Politics with Manu Raju. We look forward to even a deeper dive tonight. Thanks as well to our wonderful moderator, Madeleine Brand. After tonight, we only have two programs before next Tuesday's election. This Wednesday, we welcome the always brilliant Ann Applebaum, who will discuss the implications of the election in the context of foreign policy. Very important. And then on what I call Erev Election Night, which it means Election Night Eve, we will be treated to an exciting conversation between Lynn Vavreck, a political scientist who teaches American politics and public policy at UCLA, and Norm Ornstein, Senior Fellow Emeritus at the American Enterprise Institute, a conservative think tank. At the Institute, Norm has been studying politics, elections, and the U.S. Congress for more than 4 decades, and he's possibly the most knowledgeable person in the country about all aspects of the U.S. Congress. He co-writes the go-to reference guide that provides impartial data for congressional watchers. It's updated every 2 years, so he's really like an encyclopedia on that subject. We gave a lot of thought about who we should invite for Election Eve, and we're confident that it will be an outstanding discussion moderated by Pat Morrison. Now, please welcome my colleague and friend, Zev Yaroslavsky, to introduce tonight's guest. Zev?
Thank you, Janice, and good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, wherever you may be, as Vince Scully used to say. When I wake up these days, my head is spinning, and no, it's not vertigo. It's trying to make sense of the myriad polls sampling public opinion on this year's presidential election. This evening, we are privileged to have two of the nation's most experienced national pollsters to help clear the air and clear this all up for each of us. Celinda Lake is one of the Democratic Party's leading political strategists. She was one of the 2 lead pollsters for the Biden campaign in 2020, and she continues to serve the Democratic National Committee and dozens of Democratic candidates at all levels in the electoral process. Celinda and her firm, Lake Research Partners, are also known for their cutting-edge research on issues including the economy, healthcare, the environment, and education. Paul Maslin has been one of the nation's leading public opinion analysts and campaign strategists for more than 3 decades. A graduate of Harvard University, he joined the firm of FM3 over 30 years ago. Paul's clients have included 7 presidential campaigns, dozens of gubernatorial and Senate campaigns, major ballot measures dealing with the funding of transportation, healthcare, education, and more. And in the spirit of full disclosure, I'm proud to say that I'm a client of his and have been for decades, including our current partnership in the annual UCLA Luskin Quality of Life Index Survey, an annual groundbreaking assessment of life in Los Angeles County. Celinda and Paul are 2 of the most incisive and analytical minds in the public opinion research field, and we are lucky to have both of them, as Janice says, just 8 days before what is clearly one of the most important and competitive presidential elections in American history. They will be interviewed tonight by one of our regulars, Madeleine Brand, a prominent, intelligent, and engaging journalist and radio host on National Public Radio, and host of her insightful and award-winning program, Press Play, which originates from NPR's Southern California station, KCRW. She's the recipient of many awards, including the prestigious Edward R. Murrow Award and the Associated Press Radio Award. We will be a lot smarter at the end of this hour, although I suspect that there are still a few sleepless nights waiting us in the coming week. Madeleine, it's all yours.
Thank you, Zev. Thanks for having me back. It's great to be here. And I think I speak for everyone when I say I'm really nervous and on pins and needles. Don't know what's going to happen. I guess nobody knows what's going to happen, but tell us what's going to happen.
Celinda, you want to start?
Thanks. This is one of those times when ladies first isn't such a great thing. Well, I think that the Democrats are going to take back the House. Remember, there are 17 districts, that Biden won in 2020 that are held by Republicans. So we have a lot of room. What the margin's going to be, I don't know by how many, and a number of the races are closing. And there may be even a couple of our incumbents who lose. So I think by the same token, we're going to lose the Senate. Mm-hmm. And it was already so tight. And I think there are a couple of races that are very difficult, and then others that are getting close. And it's really pretty amazing how many of these Senate races are tightening. In terms of the presidential, I honestly, it could be either one. I think it's really tight. And people who say the momentum's with Trump, the momentum's with Harris, she's up one, she's down one, it's all ridiculous and absurd. First of all, nobody knows who's going to turn out in the end. And I think there are secret or surge Trump and Harris voters this time. So I'm not sure either one of them are completely represented in the polls. And then 1 point up, 1 point down. It just, I think, it's a ridiculous analysis that the press tries to do to get headlines. It's all within margin of error. It's too close to tell. And there are a lot of groups still in play and things still happening, including, the abortion there and the rally on the ellipse, the comments about Puerto Ricans in Madison Square Garden, Beyonce versus the Hulk. I mean, it's just a crazy, crazy cycle that's going to be crazy and volatile until the end.
Okay, well, thank you and goodbye. That would... Just kidding. Paul,
Hey, Madeline, I used to love your show, but okay.
By the way, just for kicks, we put Elon Musk and Taylor Swift on a favorable about a week ago. We found out they each had like a 6-point negative rating, right? And they canceled each other out. And I went, okay, all right, I give up.
Oh my gosh. Well, favorable in their general favorabilities or what they do to the candidates?
General favorability. Just
put and they both have big gender gaps.
Have people to react to it, and obviously it's both sides. Everyone's picking a side here.
Yeah.
Just to pick up on what Celinda said, and I agree with her on both the House and the Senate, and we can dissect that later if people want to know. In terms of the presidential, I couldn't agree more. It is so incredibly close, and I'll illustrate it in one way. There's a lot of people who think, and some of these aggregators who are basic polls on sometimes that have nothing to do with the actual ballot. For example, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is on the ballot in Michigan and Wisconsin. Most of the polls, I guarantee you, the ones that you're reading about, don't happen to actually give people that choice in the poll. And believe me, it does make a difference as somebody that's polling in Wisconsin all the time. But just to illustrate this, there's been a sense of a trend in states like Wisconsin, Michigan, maybe Pennsylvania toward Trump recently. I went through at our own polling a stretch over 2 weeks ago where Harris was tied or behind. We have not had her behind in Wisconsin for about the last 10 days. Doesn't mean it's not unbelievably close. It is unbelievably close. But I'm just simply reporting that in our own polling, it's not that we have Trump necessarily ahead there. And people in Michigan are saying somewhat the same thing. So these are incredibly close. And Celinda's absolutely right. There are some factors that, depending on who decides what and who turns out, that could flip it either way. The last thing I'll say is I don't think we're going to have a big miss. In 2016, there was a miss because there was a lot of movement toward Trump at the end. The Comey letter, in general, he moved, and the polls had undersampled non-college educated voters. In 2020, there was a bit of a miss in some states because I don't think the Trumpers were even talking to the pollsters, and that caused some difficulty. 2022, the miss was the other way. And in part, it was caused by a bunch of scam artists on the right wing who are inventing polls or publicizing polls, simply claiming there's going to be a red tsunami just to jack up interest and money and all the rest of it. This time, I have a feeling that the polls that say it's close are right, and it is close, and the national result's going to be close, and these 7 states are going to be close.
Okay. Oh my gosh. Okay. So why don't you think there's going to be a miss? Because if there were misses in the last 3 elections, as you just said, why wouldn't there be a miss now? 2016
was largely a sampling set of errors that was made and that got corrected. 2020 was not, the national numbers were very good. It was a few selective states. Wisconsin was one of them, involving public polls. And I think that the dynamic of Trump voters simply not participating in the polls wasn't correctly dealt with. I think this time there's a whole lot. We're all doing Celinda can attest to this. We're doing somersaults, backflips, and an amazing amount of churning to try to make sure that we don't miss something. And I think, could one side or the other have a break in their direction at the very end? Of course. But will that produce 4, 5, 6, 7 point move? No. It could mean that one side or the other wins by a point and a half. And that may be what the movement that happens. I think the national numbers are closer because outside of these 7 states, some of the advantages that each party have kind of collapsed a little bit more toward the middle. And so here we are. I mean, Kamala Harris I think could win the popular vote by 2 points and win the Electoral College. I think that and a lot of people wouldn't have said that. I think that's absolutely possible.
Okay, Celinda, if you don't mind, if you could give us like a really brief polling 101, because as Paul mentioned, there were problems with the previous polls with Trump voters not responding, with I guess what's known as non-response bias in the business. So tell us how these polls are conducted, given the fact that I don't know anyone who answers their cell phone if they see a number that they don't know.
Yeah, and I hate you for that. Just to be clear,
I've been burned too many
when it
times.
says research, pick it up. So a really good question. I would say number one, first of all, 85% of the polls that Paul and I do are never public. Okay, so, and I don't know what you're doing, Paul, but we're increasingly saying if the turnout is this is what's going to happen. If the turnout is this is what's going to happen. So we're being much, much more cautious about trying to assess who's going to vote and who's not. In 2016, a lot of the public polls, if they couldn't get a hold of someone, they would just take anybody who came in. That wasn't true for a lot of the private polls. Our private polls, I still thought Hillary was going to win, and she did win the national vote. But we said it was going to be a lot closer than people thought. And there was a swing at the end because of the letter. But people were replacing Trump voters with non-Trump voters. Every polling firm now has corrected for that. In 2020, Trump was telling his voters, don't talk to the pollsters, don't tell them how you're going to vote. He's not doing that now because he wants to stay even in the polls. It's important for his momentum. So nobody's telling their voters to not tell people how they're voting, quite the contrary. So I think that we're trying to correct for that as much as possible. All of us, we all use cell phones as well as landlines. We all text you as well as call you. Many of us include panels, online panels, as well as phones and texting. We don't just try to reach you once. We don't do an overnight poll. So a lot of the things that you're seeing are happening, are done in the public polls, are not done in the private polls. And as Paul said, we're turning ourselves into pretzels to try to get this right. Because Madeleine, if Paul or I say you're going to lose and you lose, we work another day. You might be mad at us because we didn't figure out how to get you to win. If we tell you you're going to win and you lose, we don't work again. So we have zero incentive to be anything.
We have double
absolutely
jeopardy.
Correct.
Double jeopardy in our business.
Do
Right?
you diverge at all in any from the public polls that we see on 530?
Oh, yeah.
And where do you diverge?
Well, number one, there are a lot of public polls that have all registered voters, and all of us, I think, are using turnout models at this point in time. Number two, we would never call a 1 point shift a shift in momentum. If you had a subgroup that was shifting 5 points and it was made up of 164 people, we would never say the black male vote has collapsed for Harris. So yeah, we differ a lot in terms of our interpretation. We don't need to get headlines. We need to get it right. And so we're very, I think most pollsters are very adamant about beefing up the sample sizes, making sure that if a subgroup is really important, to oversample that subgroup and then weight it down for the overall average, but make sure we have enough Puerto Rican voters to know what's really going on with the Puerto Rican vote. Make sure that we're doing interviews in Spanish as well as English. All the shortcuts that the public polls take, we don't take.
There have been, I'll add to that, we've had elections where there have been a number of close states.
Mhm.
There's never been an election where there have been 7 states that everybody agreed months ago were the ones that mattered, and where all of them seem, I don't
Yeah.
know if there's even an exception to this. They've all stayed close, and they're all being polled to death, both privately and publicly. And we've never had that. That's what Zev was referring to. We've never had this kind of confluence before. And I'll simply say it might end up tilting slightly in either direction, and we'll think it was a lot bigger than it really was. But I don't think, Madeleine, we're going to have some huge quote miss. It's a very close race that's going to end very close.
Okay, let's talk about some of the subgroups then, since you raised the issue, Celinda. Let's begin with Puerto Ricans, because you raised that too. And what happened yesterday in New York at Madison Square Garden? And what do you think that's going to do to the race?
Well, I think it helps Harris. First of all, a lot of the Latino vote in the blue wall is Puerto Rican. Puerto Ricans have very, very high turnout in Puerto Rico. And when they first come here, or even multi-generational, their turnout plummets in the 48 states. I think this is going to increase turnout. And in fact, the Puerto Rican vote in Pennsylvania has been very low turnout. I think it's also going to move, everyone's been talking about and observing the trend over time of Latino men moving away from the Democratic Party, particularly on economic issues. And they're feeling that they just want a good economy, and then they will be the ones who will make it in this economy for themselves and their families. And that's carried a lot of weight, even though, and then there is an assumption that Latino voters in general disagree with Trump's immigration positions, and they disagree with his immigration rhetoric and some of his positions like dividing families, but there is a lot of agreement. And of course, Puerto Ricans are American citizens. So there's just a lot going on there. And I think this is an opportunity. And I think you have some vivid images this builds on. And one of those vivid images is throwing paper towels at people who were in urgent distress and then not getting them the money they needed. And actually playing games with FEMA, which the Democrats have not done. So I think this is an opportunity to really pick up votes. And the good news is, we were talking earlier, the Harris campaign has the resources to target and do whatever they want to do. It's unbelievable the amount of resources they have in people, in channels, in money. And you can really target voters anymore on social media, on radio, on cultural events. So there's great ability to target a particular constituency like Puerto Rican voters in Pennsylvania or in Michigan.
So, Paul, given the fact that she has raised $1 billion, it's
well over that.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, and a lot from small donors. And it used to be conventional wisdom that money talks when it comes to buying votes, but money talks in terms of buying advertising and convincing people to vote a certain way. So my question is, why isn't it as important, or doesn't seem to be as important this election cycle, if she is so far ahead in the money game, but the polls are dead even?
Well, it's not as if the other side doesn't have money too. And any of us that are involved right now in any of these 7 states, I'm heavily involved in one of them, can vouch for the fact that certainly for this last month or so, the amount of spending has been getting very, very equal. So whatever advantage she might have had in August and September, it's gone now. And plus, there's so many other pieces, as we all understand from our lives, there are pieces of communication and media that we all pick up and then have so many influences other than paid communication, not the least of which is, you have a propaganda machine on the other side that is working 24/7 and shields their voters from bad information and makes sure to communicate negative information. And that, believe me, that matters a lot. And there is nothing comparable on our side, sadly. And that's just the reality of American politics in 2024. So all those things, it's a good thing that she was able to do what she's been able to do. And we'll see. The true test will be a week from tomorrow. And I'm reminded that, of all the elections we've been talking about, the one that does start to, we all can talk about 2020 or 2016 or 2000 with Gore. But I think there are elements of this. I don't want to get cocky here and say Harris is going to sweep in all these close states. But I think the Obama 2012 campaign, those polls were very tight in several key states that both sides agreed they were fighting over. In fact, Romney's pollster told him on election day he thought they were going to win. And they were surprised ultimately at what the Obama turnout operation produced. I'm not saying that we could have as big a difference this year, but I do think, and I want to get very specific now, I think that there is a piece of this electorate that involves women under the age of 50, that if there's going to be a surprise and a decisive blow that the electorate makes between now and election day, it will be Kamala Harris's vote among younger women. That could end up being the difference. Some of them are first-time voters. Some of them are suburban women in their 30s and 40s who are switching their viewpoint. It's not only women, by the way, there's men. I'll talk about that in a minute. But that could still end up being a surprise in terms of turnout. Not that Trump obviously doesn't have the ability to turn out his voters as well. He does. But that's a potential surprise here in these key states that could end up working to the benefit of Harris.
And if I can say one thing, just to reinforce what Paul is saying, I think Kansas is a really good model. So Kansas initiative happens right after Dobbs. Registration among younger women soars. The turnout rate of younger women in Kansas was higher than the turnout rate of any single male group, any group of men. That's what I think, that is a surprise factor that I think you're going to see. I would also say, I don't think this is an election where some of the traditional rules apply. Like if, Harris had so much to do in 90 days, essentially. She had to get known. She had to get her past out. She had to get her roots out. She had to get her values out. She had to get her economic plan out. She had to reinforce her advantage on abortion. She had to establish him as the riskier choice. I mean, my God, it takes $1 billion to do all that. The other thing I think that's being estimated, the Trump campaign is sending out right now more mail in the battleground states than we are. Some of that is because they target more older voters. And they have had, like Pennsylvania, let's take Pennsylvania. They have been working over Pennsylvania with misinformation, disinformation, social media for 5 years. I don't care how much money they spend on it. They have 5 years of having done that. And granted, the candidate has changed, but they have real memory muscle in that state and raised real questions with voters. And then I think the thing that Paul said about the ecosystem is really, really true. And we have as an independent variable in some of our polls, how many hours of Fox News do you watch? Because it's such a predictor of attitudes.
And what's the magic number for your attitude?
Oh, the more you have, the more you watch, the more your mind is poisoned. And the more anti-climate change you are.
So is there a gender? I'm wondering also if there's a gender divide in Fox News viewers. Is there?
Well, not as much as you would think for a couple of reasons. The husband turns on Fox maybe for the sports, and the wife just leaves it on because, are you going to fight about that? No.
Interesting.
So not as much as you would think.
Let me ask you about the Bradley effect and maybe a reverse Bradley effect. So this is for the youngs among us. When LA Mayor Tom Bradley ran for governor, people were polled and said, "Oh yeah, I'll vote for him." And then when they got in the ballot box, they did not, and they called that the Bradley effect, meaning race. So, do you think that that's behind us, or is there still? Do you still account for that when you're doing polling? Perhaps a Bradley effect with Harris?
No, I think we're way past it. It doesn't mean that there aren't people that are going to vote on the basis of race or gender or some other bias. I think we're in a cultural war now more than a racial war. I think the Trump campaign has brilliantly and cynically managed to use the transgender issue in a way that is damaging, and it's damaging with women, primarily middle-aged to older women as opposed to younger women, but they clearly made inroads there. And when you see those two black guys talking about Kamala and the prisoners, that message is not being used to simply try to influence black vote. In fact, I don't think it's influencing a lot of black votes. It's being used to influence white votes. And I think that that's really the piece of this that's the trickiest. I think people are, by and large, pretty open about who they're going to support and why. I don't think that they're socially saying, "Oh, I have to say," it was more novel when Tom Bradley ran, or when Harold Washington or Wilson Goode, two campaigns I worked on, ran for mayor of Philadelphia and Chicago, back in the early 80s. I think we're way past that. Now, as to the gender question, and then maybe I'll defer to Celinda here, as to is there still some outstanding reluctance that could kick in, that was also present in 2016, and I'm not certainly going to deny it. I tend to think it's more plus than minus for us, but there's still a downside here, and we're all going to be looking at at all the entrails when it's all over about who decided and why they did. But I'll leave it to you, Celinda, to talk about gender, but I think gender is still obviously a factor.
So the Bradley effect was not about racism and sexism having an impact on the vote. It was about people lying about that impact on the vote. Right. And we saw it in 2008, actually. Ethnic white Democrats who thought they were being interviewed by someone white were less supportive of Obama than ethnic white Democrats who were interviewed by someone they thought was African American. And you'll remember Trump gave that incredibly powerful speech at the end to labor union members, which made a big difference and made parallels between racism and anti-Catholicism. Mm-hmm. But I don't think people are hiding it anymore. I kind of am with Paul. I don't think we're having that much measurement difficulty. You didn't even see it that much in 2016. But I think misogyny and racism are affecting people's choices. And I think you're seeing overt misogyny. And then you're seeing internalized misogyny among older women. A lot of older women will say things like, well, I'd vote for her, but I just don't know if she can handle the men. I don't know if foreign leaders will think she's strong enough. I don't know if foreign leaders will shake her hand. I mean, come on, people. You're the president of the United States. People are going to shake your hand if you're a Martian, if you're the president of the United States. But anyway, you get all those kind of commentary, which I think is just internalized sexism. And so I do think misogyny and racism are affecting the vote. And frankly, we can measure it. I don't think it's particularly hidden, unfortunately.
What about I'm going to call this the reverse Bradley effect, but I guess maybe the shy Harris voter that normally would be maybe a Nikki Haley voter. Are you seeing that?
Okay. This is really important. And again, I don't think anybody's shy anymore, Madeline. My only question is like, we're so out there as a country, nobody's hiding anything anymore. But I do believe if Kamala Harris wins this election 8 days from now, I am absolutely convinced that there are a group of either outright Republicans, some of these 2 of the 3 states involved, Michigan and Wisconsin, don't have party registration. Pennsylvania does. So when we say Republican about Wisconsin or Michigan, we're talking about their belief system here, not what they actually register to do. People who are Republican or independents who lean Republican, which is sort of the Nikki Haley, Liz Cheney, et cetera. We are seeing, got reported on CNN, I think this weekend, but we are seeing in our private polls substantial gains I'm polling in Wisconsin for Kamala Harris and Tammy Baldwin. And if they win, if Harris wins, we are going to point to those voters who essentially said they're not all women, by the way. A lot of them are college educated men. These are suburban voters who are habitual Republican voters who finally hit a tipping point. And this has been growing in the last 2 weeks, by the way. This is not a phenomenon that's 6 weeks old. I tend to think that when it started to become clear to people, oh my God, Trump might actually win this thing, I think there are a group of Republican-leaning moderate voters that finally said enough is enough. I am not going along with this anymore. And if that's true, that could underline the word could, because there are cross currents here too. There's non-college educated voters and women and others that are shading toward Trump. But if that's true, that could be where the difference lies. It's like ships passing in the night. The group of college educated, moderate Republicans are moving in one direction. A group of more non-college, independent, working class voters, including some minorities, some, not many, but some are moving in a different direction, which ends up being the bigger movement. It's fascinating, though, we've only been seeing this really in the last month. Was not true, certainly wasn't true when Biden was on the ballot, but was not true 3, 4, 5, 6 months ago.
Fascinating. So at this point, I don't know when you've conducted your latest surveys, either one of you, but is there anyone who still hasn't made up their mind? Yes?
1%, maybe. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are people who are cross-pressured. Now,
Yeah.
some of those people won't vote. Some of those people will skip the ballot. Some of those people are going to vote for RFK. And I really agree with what Paul said earlier. It is so irresponsible not to have the ballot actually reflect who's on the ballot, particularly this year of all years. So, yeah, there are some undecided. They're not very big, but neither is the margin in all of these states. But I think that an extension of what Paul was saying, and we're seeing the same trend. One of the things about that trend, and I said this already, is if we're going to maximize our vote as Democrats, we have to keep blue collar women from voting the same way as their husbands. If the Republicans are going to maximize their vote, the college educated women are gone. They've got to keep, and they've launched a program for the first time in their history to keep college educated men from voting the same way as their wives. And so there's pressure here. The gender gap is pressuring households right now. But honestly, there is one of the things that's even, if you combine education and gender, we used to have those fun books about women are from Venus, men are from Mars. Well, can I tell you this? Blue collar men are from Pluto and college educated women are from Mercury. I mean, these are two different solar systems, frankly.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
So there's going to be a wave of divorces after this.
Well, yeah, maybe.
And you're part of the reason.
Well, I'm going to tell those women not to get married again because unmarried women vote very Democratic.
We aren't talking much.
No weddings in the next 8 days, okay? You don't have time for it anyway.
We aren't talking much about Georgia and North Carolina, but let me just say, number one, I think most, not all, most of the reporting and the supposed decline in support among Black voters for Kamala Harris is a myth. And I think those numbers are still going to be very, very big. And the kind of voter we're talking about, we're putting it in terms of suburban Milwaukee or Detroit or Philadelphia. But what are the Atlanta suburbs? What are the Charlotte suburbs or the Research Triangle or parts of North Carolina? But that same group, growing numbers of suburban white voters who are college educated, and they're on the horns of a dilemma. And while most of the focus all year long has been Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, more lately, obviously, Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, Nevada, kind of in a little bit in the background, but still in play. I still think we could have a surprise coming out of either one of those two southern states. I don't think they are definitive by any means. No matter, again, the polling is really close. Well, Trump's ahead. Well, if he's ahead, it might be a point. And I'm not going to sit here and say I know for a fact how that gets resolved in the last 8 days. If the Black turnout is significant in Atlanta and in Charlotte and other parts of Georgia and North Carolina, watch out.
Okay. I think the other thing about African American men, and there may be some slight erosion there, and I think the campaign's working very hard to shore that up. African American men are still going to be her second best group, okay? So the problem is if you lose some African American men, you've got to make it up somewhere. And it's harder to do because that's your best area to make it up. But let's be clear. African American women are going to vote in record numbers at record high levels for her. And African American men, whatever their vote is, are going to be her second best group. Some of this stuff gets really distorted in the analysis. I've had people, and I'm sure you have, Paul, too, who call me and say, is Harris going to lose the Black male vote? And it's like, no, of course not.
Yeah.
Right. I think, well, Obama, the remarks that he was reported saying, I think that stoked that a lot. Where are the white women? Because white women in the past have gone for Trump.
Well, white women are not monolithic, number one. So white unmarried women, white younger women, and white college educated women have not gone for Trump.
Right.
So I think it's wrong to take such a big, and this is a common error, Madeline, I'm glad for your question, to take such a big group of voters and say that they're monolithic. They're not. But we have to do better with white women for sure. And the group we have to do better with is older non-college educated women. And both sides are fighting hard for that vote. And Trump is trying to scare them into voting for him. It's very clear with these immigration ads, crime ads, transgender ads, combining them in these prison transgender operation things. So
What's
there,
and what's
and
go
yeah,
ahead.
go ahead.
You pull that issue. How big an issue is it? Transgender operations.
Well, it's never going to poll as a big issue, but as we've all seen, and Celinda and I have observed our entire lives, just because it's not, quote, the most salient issue or the most important issue in a poll doesn't mean it doesn't turn into something very powerful. And I think it's become a cultural wedge that they have used to try to get at, a broader feeling among, let's face it, the original core Trump vote are a group of people in America that, for whatever set of reasons, believe that they have been either left behind or dealt out or ignored or mocked, and that the country has moved away from them. When they look at all the diversity, when they look at all the difference of the things that have happened and have changed from gay marriage to a black president to you name it, and now the most recent happens to be girls in bathrooms or sex change operations or in prisons or athletes. There's a volleyball team in California, a university. 5 university teams have said, we're not playing that team because they happen to have a transgender athlete, apparently. I mean, it's become shorthand for something bigger. And I will simply say, it pains me to say this. The advertising has been incredibly effective. And I'm going to say one more thing, which I think, it's 8 days out, but we got to say it. I don't think it was ever responded to effectively, and I don't understand that. I think in general, the Harris campaign has done a very, very good job. As Celinda put it, they had to go from 0 to 60 in no time. And she's done an awful lot of things very well. I am perplexed about why they chose not to directly respond to that attack. Believe me, it has hurt. And no question it has hurt. And you're still seeing the ads. There's good reason for it. Some calculation was that 1/3 of their advertising in the first 2 weeks of October was on that issue. 1/3 of all their advertising was on that issue. And I don't think that Harris ever or her campaign ever effectively addressed it.
Well, and let me add 2 other things. Number one, Americans not very good at math, and Americans really down and out and scared of things. And so you got the American public now guessing that 20% of Americans are transgender. Now, those of us on this call, at least Madeline, you, Paul, and me, I got no problem with living in America where 20% of the people are transgender. I welcome it, but it's 1%. And people, think about it. It meant when you went into Denny's for pancakes, every 5th table was all transgender people. Now, was it? Come on. And then you had 65% of the voters saying Democrats were obsessed with the transgender issue. We're not obsessed. They're obsessed, but we're not going to let people be hurt. I don't blame the Harris campaign, Paul, as much as I blame our whole side and our donors. We should have put together something the minute it started. We should have responded. Somebody should have taken that track. It's too much to ask of a campaign to do it. And after this election, I think it's a major call to action for our side. We do not want to let this get marginalized, just like they used to marginalize parental notification, just like they used to marginalize racism, et cetera. We're not going to let it happen. We're going to take it on. But I think it's too much to ask for the campaign. And I do wonder why our side didn't take this more seriously.
Okay, let's talk a little bit before we get to questions about the ballot races you mentioned at the outset about the House and the Senate, Celinda. And first of all, I'm wondering if you're seeing any split decisions, such as a significant chunk of Republicans perhaps voting for Harris, but then also voting for the Republican Senate candidate. And I guess maybe, Paul, you can talk about that with regards to Wisconsin.
Yeah, I'd say in Wisconsin, the two races have narrowed, and that's generally been, we had a quote split verdict in 2022 where Tony Evers won by a little over a point and Mandela Barnes lost by a point. That's about as stretched out as Wisconsin gets. Tammy Baldwin's last race was one of the only exceptions to this. Generally, these races end up getting very, very close, and I will simply say that those two races right now are very, very close. I would not expect that there will be a significant difference between Baldwin's performance and Harris's performance on election day. I think they're both narrowly ahead, but it is very narrow. So that's a case where I think they collapsed. Some of these other states, and I'll also defer to Celinda here, but obviously the other two that are in the closest, they're the two, and obviously in Arizona and Nevada, I think there's a bigger split for both Gallego and Rosen. I think that the Slotkin and Casey races are similar to Wisconsin, maybe not quite as close, but they're also very close in terms of the Senate performance and the presidential.
I think one of the things that's going on is a lot of these senators had a pretty big ticket splitting, and ticket splitting isn't very big anymore, particularly as polarized as people are. And these races are getting closer, even the ones that are further apart, except for Carrie Lake, who's kind of in her own place. These races are all getting closer. And like the Montana Senate race and the Ohio Senate race, Trump is going to carry those states by double digits. And so these senators were running way ahead of Trump. There were a lot of ticket splitters, and unfortunately, I think that ticket splitting is diminishing.
Yeah.
So I think that's problematic.
What do you think in Texas? There's some Democrats who think, oh, that Cruz could be toppled, but the polls are, as far as I can see, don't look that.
Texas is always our magical holy grail, and nobody likes Ted Cruz. Colin Allred has run a good race. There are parts of the Texas electorate that have gotten better for us. Some of the things I've been talking about. There are other parts that, along the Rio Grande Valley that have not. At the end of the day, and obviously Kamala was just there with Beyonce in Houston. At the end of the day, it would not shock me if that ends up being a fairly close result. It would shock me if we won it. That may be a bridge too far. There's going to be a time somewhere in my lifetime, I hope, where we crack Texas. As of right now, it just seems to be the fish that just barely gets away.
Okay. Let us go to some of the questions. And well, let's go back to Michigan then. Keith says, how many young people won't vote for Kamala because of Israel v. Palestine? Celinda?
Not very many. In Michigan, though, you have the Arab American vote. And we should remember that 58% of the Arab American vote in Michigan is Protestant. That said, I think, and it's 1 to 2% of the vote, an important 1 to 2%. I do think that vote we will not get. Yeah, I think it's just gone too far for that community, and they haven't seen enough response. But, a third of the young people say that Gaza is a major impact on their vote because of the genocide. A third, and they call it genocide. A third of the young people vote say it's an issue because we're spending too much money abroad. And 40% of young people say the economy is their number one issue. So I don't think in the end, any thought that going to Trump is going to improve the situation, right. I think that's ludicrous. Right. And he hasn't even attempted to get that vote or attempted to communicate that.
There was more concern back in the spring and summer, and frankly, there would have been more concern with Joe Biden on the ticket. I'm not saying it is an issue, and I think Celinda's put her finger on the real problem here. And again, if these three states, just leaving aside the others for a second, if they all come down to 10, 15, 20,000 vote margins, whichever side is on the wrong side of that kind of close outcome is going to point to a million things that could have been different. But clearly we have suffered some decline in support among that Palestinian community and Arab community in Dearborn and elsewhere in Michigan. There's no doubt about that. How damaging it is and whether it'll affect the overall result, your guess is as good as mine.
How big a factor is Jill Stein in that race? Because there is a Muslim American group that is backing her.
Kamala is running negative ads and has been in Detroit. I stream stuff and I actually watch Michigan television sometimes. And boy, I saw those ads about 10 days ago or so. I think she's also started to do them in Milwaukee. So there's definitely a concern on our part. I don't think Jill Stein's polling more than about 1%. But, again, every 1% is potentially important here. So there is an overt attempt right now to knock down some of that support and to sort of call out Jill Stein's cynicism is the way I'll put it, in these key states. So it's not as big a factor as RFK Jr. He's getting more support than the other two combined. And his vote is much more clear cut in terms of his voters would prefer Trump over Harris if they had to make that choice.
So Harris is glad that he's on the ballot there?
No, Harris is upset.
But if he pulls from Trump?
No, he pulls from Harris.
Oh, he does.
Who? Bobby?
RFK, yeah.
No, he doesn't. Not in our stuff. No, he's pulling from Trump in Wisconsin.
Oh, okay.
What about Michigan?
I assume the same, but I don't know. I'm not polling Michigan, but I assume the same.
Okay. Let's see. John from Sydney, Australia. We have to ask because from Sydney, Australia. Do you expect a larger turnout in 2024? And which candidate would be more likely to benefit if turnout is larger?
What do you think, Celinda? I think it will be bigger.
I think it will be bigger too. And I think it depends on who shows up. It could be both candidates. I mean, I truly believe there's going to be a surge on both sides.
Yeah.
And I don't know who's going to outnumber whom.
I think there's a Goldilocks spot for Harris. I don't know quite where it is. I think it's there, though. And I think above that, it starts getting a little more dicey because now you've got a group of disinterested voters who have been just, think about it. If you're really disinterested and you're negative about everything, you're not as likely to go for an incumbent party, period. So there's a point at which I worry about that final group of people that vote. But overall, though, Madeline, I think it's going to be an increase and 2020 was already huge, but I think it's going to go up.
And I think it depends a little bit on the first surge will be young people and African Americans primarily, right, but young people. The second surge, and I really agree, is not only are they low information, they're very downscale. Yep. These people are hurting in this economy. So I agree with you. Do they do a Hail Mary? I mean, we had a young African-American male in a focus group say, we were pushing the racism thing. This was in Georgia. And he said, listen, I know Trump is a racist. I'm a young Black man in America. I encounter racists every day. I'm just hoping I get a little better shot.
A little bit of money. Yeah, mm-hmm. I had a woman in a Wisconsin focus group 6 months ago who said, in response to a whole bunch of people just teeing off on Trump, she looked at me and she's right next to me sitting there, and she said, yeah, I know he's a crook, but he'll give me some money. I mean, it was there. So
I guess the economy is the number one issue for most, if not all, voters. But Trump's economic plan is basically tariffs, and I haven't heard a lot more than that. Harris has a more detailed economic plan. What do voters think about the various economic plans? And do they make the decision based on that, or do they just think back vaguely to the Trump era?
Well, you're empirically right about what their plans are, but you're politically incorrect, respectfully. I mean, first of all, people think that the Trump economy was way better than it actually was. They remember it way better. They think they got an $1,800 check, and they constantly recite that in our focus groups. They think he's a businessman, so he'll be better on jobs. And, maybe the CEOs will do the best, but we'll do better too. They think that there's no convincing the public that he's a bad businessman because he's got a golden escalator and he's got hotels with his name on it, and then he's got Mar-a-Lago. I mean, the guy's wealthy. He's a good businessman. And fine if he declared bankruptcy 6 times. I guess that's what businessmen do to get out of their taxes, as one person said in our focus group. So there's no convincing them of that. And then Republicans are ahead of Democrats on the economy. And it is our Achilles heel for every election. The flip side is people also support tariffs. 60% of people in the blue wall states support increased tariffs on China, even if it increases their prices. And when we went into focus groups to explore that, they said, well, listen, I'm going to make more because it'll be made in America. Yeah, okay, it'll cost more, but I'll be able to afford it because I'm going to have a better job. So they have a very developed schema here. And then Americans in the Midwest do not know that Harris was anti NAFTA. They think she was pro NAFTA, and that's never been clarified. So his economic plan is different than just raise tariffs. A lot of people, and yes, she's been on it, but a lot of people do not know what her economic plan is. And they don't think a proposal on small business and on housing is an economic plan. They think those are two good proposals, but where's the plan behind it?
And I would,
So it's more complicated than that
absolutely,
summary.
I agree with Celinda totally. And I basically believe people don't vote on plans. I would say this, the one thing, if you notice the Harris advertising, it has been very, very heavy on sort of going after using average people who basically say, I'm not rich, and going after Trump hard on his sort of callous comments about, if you're rich, I'm going to give you all the money in the world. I'm going to give you big tax cuts, et cetera. So I think she's done a pretty good in it for a year in which, whether perception is accurate or not, but the truth was that we were on the defensive, and it's been a negative for us, the condition of the economy, and that comparison, as Celinda just outlined. I think she's done a pretty good job, and we have collectively done a pretty good job of mitigating against that, so that again, in a close election, anything could make the difference. But it's not, if that was their number one issue that was absolutely going to ride Donald Trump into the White House, you wouldn't have been seeing all these immigration, crime, transgender, San Francisco prosecutor ads that you've been seeing the last 6 weeks. So it has turned into, I wouldn't say the dog that didn't bark, but it is less of a powerful issue for the Republicans than people might have thought.
See, I worry, I have a little bit different view of it. I think her advertising has been much more economic and populist than her speeches. And I wish she had taken more of that to her own presentation. And I would end on, more a higher ratio of economics to fascism, honestly, because fascism gets the college educated vote, but we got the college educated vote. And they turn out at very high rates. But to reassure that woman married to, in the middle of Flint, Michigan, married to an ex-UAW worker who's got a shitty job now in a warehouse. I wish we had a little bit stronger populist economic message coming from her. People want to hear it from her.
What about, something intangible like the vibes and likability, favorability? I guess you do pull on that, so it's not so intangible. But do people feel like, do they feel connected to her? Do they feel like she gets the problems?
I think it was a major advantage for her with the transition. And it helped get her into this race and as close as she got, as quickly as she got. No question about it. I think the convention did a good job on that front. I think all those vibes were wonderful. I think by the time you get to the cold light of dawn in the middle or late October heading into November, I think vibes are, sorry to say, kind of out the window now. And we're in a much tougher, different kind of dynamic. There are still, though, to go to Celinda's earlier point, there are still a group of people who are Black women, younger women, people who still believe that this is something very personal to them, and it may help produce a higher turnout, and that could be decisive in the end. But it is not by any means the dominant aspect of the race right now, and I think that's been reflected really in the way that she's been campaigning. This is a tough slog right now. And not, I said to somebody a couple of weeks ago, I kind of want to see the prosecutor Harris here at the end in terms of her toughness, as opposed to, the candidate of joy. We're a long way away from joy. I hate to say it.
I think the other thing was, I think the vibe initially was really, I agree with you, Paul, and you laid it out very well. I think it also contrasted really well at that time with Trump because he really lost his stride. He did not know how to run against her. He was off his stride for a long time.
Yep.
And till the debate and through the debate, now he's caught his stride. I mean, we might be totally offended, but he knows what he's doing and he's damn smart about it. The guy has a certain very dark instinct that's very savvy about sales. And he knows his space. And so I think that I think you're right. I think Vibe did a lot of good for us, raised the money, got the volunteers, but now we need to see Prosecutor Harris. I agree, and she needs to prosecute the case on who's going to benefit on the economy, as well as the different brand of leadership.
Yep.
Does the favorability, though, does that count? when people say,
yeah, it does,
you're one of
and
them?
it really does
Sure.
for women, because people will vote for a man they dislike if they think he's competent. People are much more hesitant to vote for a woman they dislike, even if they think she's competent. And women have to prove all the time that they're competent, and being competent makes you more likable. So it's a much more complicated package, I think, for women than for men. Men are just assumed to be competent, and as long as they don't violate it, whether you like them or not, you're going to vote for a competent man. It's a much more complicated package, I think, for women.
But just to illustrate how close this is, in our polling, her favorable rating is somewhere around 47 or 48, and her unfavorable is somewhere around 52 or 53. And Trump's favorable is somewhere around 46 or 47, and his unfavorable is somewhere around 52 or 50. I mean, that's how close it is. It's just incredibly close.
All right, let's ask another down ballot question, because we got the Senate, and you think the Senate is lost, right? We have that pretty much.
It would take a shock somewhere that I'm not sure we're anticipating. Unfortunately, Celinda's home state, Tester, has run a really good race, but it's just tough. It's tough for him this year.
In Montana.
Yeah, and that state is 8% more Republican now.
Yeah.
But the House, you say, could flip.
I think it will flip.
And why do you think that is? Because I was checking 538 just before this talk, and they seem to have it narrowed a lot.
Well, the margin that it flips I think has gotten smaller. And there are a couple of incumbents, I think, who are going to lose that we weren't originally counting on losing. But I think that, again, we had 17, it's a very small margin, and we had 17 districts that Biden won that were held by Republicans. And I just think that, and we've got some really good recruits. And, you can create a little bit of an individual dynamic in a congressional race where people are more worried about people don't expect you to have the whole economy of the United States as something that your congressperson can fix. They expect you to get their mother's Social Security.
How much of a factor are the two at the top when it comes to the local House races?
Well, they're a factor because everything ultimately, it's still a national election that gets nationalized, where the issues that are being debated, there may be some differences in a given district, but where most of the issues that are being debated are the same ones. And, I thought in the initial aftermath of Harris, when people still thought Trump was a clear favorite to win this election, there were voters who I think were almost, you could sense them saying, okay, yeah, maybe hit Trump, but I don't trust this person running for the Senate or for the House, this Republican. I'm not gonna support them. And so there was ticket splitting to our benefit going on. I think a lot of that has been reduced or even eliminated as the campaign has proceeded. In one sense, Trump's not an overwhelming favorite to win anymore, but also just the sheer fact of the campaigning on the same set of issues tends to bring people together. But I think Celinda fundamentally is right. We have an opportunity that unless something goofy happens, these Biden districts are going to be Harris districts, are going to be, most of those Democrats are going to win. And that should give us the ability by a narrow margin to win back the House.
And you have the abortion issue, and you had us losing California and New York races we should never have lost. I mean, due to local circumstances like the bail reform issue in New York, et cetera. And I think both of I think these races are not, we're going to pick up the California seats, I think, or at least some of them. We're going to pick up at least a couple of the New York seats. So I just think that, and then abortion is such a clear issue, particularly in states that have initiatives, because voters are like, I know how I have to vote. I don't want all the crap. I just want to know, are you voting yes or no? Just tell me if you're voting yes or no. And it used to be that candidates could get out from underneath that because they'd say, well, the vote is private. And voters are like, no, it's not anymore. Not post-Dobbs. Tell me where you're at, because you're supposed to be representing me. So I want to know where you're at.
Interesting. Okay, so final question. It is, as you say, maybe 1% of the voters have not made up their minds, so it's a get out the vote situation. Who has the
Well, I think
background?
there's still some persuasion, honestly, but yeah, not 20% persuasion, but maybe 4 or 5.
Okay, within the margin of error.
Yeah, there you go.
So
Only Madeleine should report on polls from now until the election.
right, polls are meaningless. Get out the vote efforts. Who's better? What side?
Well, the state I poll in, both sides are really good. I'm not going to say we're bad. We do everything we need to do in Wisconsin, but so do the Republicans, and it's been this way now for 2 decades. I can't say that either side is better than the other. And I know our folks in Michigan are strong. The state, frankly, I'm having the biggest question mark about, Celinda, and I don't know if you can help me here, but it's the state I grew up in. I don't have a clue, Madeleine, about what's really happening in Pennsylvania. There are people in Pennsylvania who say they don't see the same kind of Trump activity. But, then somebody else said that they saw in 2016 or 2020, and somebody else said, yeah, but they didn't invest in the signs this time. So maybe they're doing an entirely different thing. There was a story a few weeks ago that said a lot of the sort of Republican general committee people and local officials were saying, I don't know what Trump is doing this time. They're not doing it the standard way. And they were kind of bemoaning those efforts. But on the other hand, maybe they've got a secret sauce somewhere, and that voter that Celinda was talking about that's disengaged and disconnected and more downscale, living in somewhere in the Western Pennsylvania, maybe the Trump people know how to get that person out. So I don't know. I think until proved otherwise, you have to assume both sides are pretty good at what they're doing.
Yeah, I think that our side is superb. I think there's nobody who gets it better than Jen O'Malley Dillon. I think the campaign's phenomenal. But I think we tend to be a little arrogant about the Trump operation. And I don't underestimate them. And they have social media that they're very active in. They have their channels of communication, coming back, Paul, to a point you made earlier. So I think we could be, if we're too casual about this, we could underestimate their turnout operation. And when you're in a state, like I was struck, Paul, I thought you were going to say the Democratic effort's a little bit better than the Republican effort. And it's sobering to me that you said both sides are good. In my state, my home state, Montana, that I watch, both sides are good. So I think that sometimes we as Democrats can be a little arrogant about this. And, honestly, we have more problems with turnout than they do. They're relying on an older, whiter base that turns out more than ours does. So we've got more struggle here. We've got more push.
I'll give you a good example of that. In Wisconsin, to vote early, which has not been a thing in past elections, but now more and more people are doing it. But they're not to get too much in the weeds, but there's an issue involving labels and how people are identified, and that they weren't pre-printed, so they have to be printed on the spot. And the Republicans have fancy fast printers in Waukesha County, and the Democrats in Dane County don't have. So what does that mean? That means if you want to vote early in Milwaukee or Madison, you're in a line, a much bigger line if you're in a Democratic precinct or area than you are if you're in a Republican one. And, obviously you worry that some people are going to show up and go, I'm not doing this, and off they go, and hope they've got to come back somewhere in these last 7 or 8 days. So there are all kinds of little nuances. We have an excellent effort in Wisconsin. It's just I don't diminish or not respect what the Republicans do on the other side, because look at the outcomes in Wisconsin and how close they've been. Both sides are very good at turning their vote out.
All right. Well, we'll have to leave it there. We could go on and on, I'm sure. And I'm sure you will in the next 7 to 8 days. So thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your knowledge.
Thank you, Madeleine, and thanks for the good questions.
Oh, well.
And Paul, always a pleasure to do it with you, and I learn stuff every time.
All right.
And remember, it won't be over on November 5th.
Yeah, that's
this thing's
sure.
gonna last a while.
Yeah, I can anticipate that already. Thank you both. And for all of you watching, join us on Wednesday. Ann Applebaum will be here. She will join Larry Mantle for a discussion on how this election will affect global affairs, Ukraine, Israel, etc. So join us again at this time on Wednesday. And thanks for joining us tonight. I'll see you next time.